Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Daniel always believed a solid marriage was built on little details. It was the breakfasts made with care, the goodnight texts even when one of them got home late, the weekend plans that ranged from binge-watching shows to walks in the park. With Laura, he'd found exactly that. 5 years of marriage that seemed to have flown by in the blink of an eye, yet left deep marks of closeness. He was a 32-year-old architect working at a respected firm, designing commercial and residential buildings. Laura, a 31-year-old marketing manager, thrived at an agency handling major brands. They lived in a modern apartment that Daniel had helped renovate, every corner reflecting their shared taste. Their routine was predictable, but comfortable. Until a single photograph changed everything. It was a Friday night when Laura came home excited, talking about the team gathering that had happened earlier. She showed him several photos on her phone, all capturing relaxed moments among colleagues. Daniel looked on with genuine interest, happy to see her so connected with her team. But when one particular photo appeared on the screen, something inside him tightened. It was a group shot, everyone smiling at the camera. Laura stood in the front row, and right behind her, her boss Bradley had his hands resting on her shoulders. At least, that's what it was supposed to look like. But the angle of the photo clearly showed his right hand several inches below her shoulder, in a position suggesting too much familiarity. His left hand, meanwhile, was slightly tilted, fingers curled in a way that didn't seem casual at all. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't the jealous type, he never had been. He trusted Laura completely. But that image unsettled him in a way he couldn't ignore. He tried to be subtle. "Is your boss always this hands-on with the team?" Laura looked at him with a confused expression, then laughed. "What do you mean by that?" Daniel pointed to the photo. His hand, "It looks like it's in kind of a weird spot, doesn't it?" Laura's laugh turned into something between amusement and irritation. "Daniel, you're seeing things. It's just a photo. We were all squeezed together, it's normal." He tried to push a bit further, but she cut him off. "Seriously, you're sounding paranoid. Bradley's married, has kids. He's my boss, nothing more." Daniel let the subject drop, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Over the next few days, he started paying closer attention. Little things that used to go unnoticed now carried a different weight. Laura had always had meetings, of course, but now they seemed to drag on longer. "I'll be working late, we've got a big campaign," became a recurring phrase. The frequent, affectionate messages during the day dwindled. When Daniel sent something, replies took hours. Laura blamed it on being swamped with work, and he wanted to believe her. But there was something about the way she now held her phone, turning the screen face down when she left it on the table, or how she even took it into the bathroom with her. Daniel didn't want to be that husband. He didn't want to distrust without cause. But his unease kept growing. It was on a Tuesday that he made a decision. He wouldn't cross the line into full invasion by rummaging through her phone, but he needed answers. He spent hours online, reading forums and reviews, until he found a discreet GPS tracker, small enough to go unnoticed. He placed the order with express shipping, feeling dirty just for considering it. When the package arrived, he stored it in his office drawer, staring at the little box several times a day as if it were a grenade ready to detonate. Part of him wanted to throw it away, forget he'd ever bought it, and return to blind trust. But the other part, the part that saw Laura flipping her phone face down, the part that counted her increasingly frequent late hours, knew he needed certainty. When Laura left for work on Wednesday morning, he stayed home, claiming he had an online meeting he could handle from home. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, Daniel grabbed the spare key from the kitchen key holder. His hands shook as he unlocked her car in the building's garage. He crouched beside the back seat, searching for the best spot to hide the device. Under the passenger seat was perfect, impossible to see unless someone was specifically looking. He attached the tracker there, tested it to make sure it was secure, then locked the car again. Guilt ate at him all day. He sat on the living room couch, staring at the app on his phone that now showed Laura's car location in real time. It was an invasion of privacy, he knew that. If she wasn't doing anything wrong, he'd be the villain of the story. But he convinced himself it was just to be sure, to prove he was wrong so he could finally relax, toss the tracker in the trash, and never think about it again. The first few days were normal. The car went from home to her agency's office, then to the grocery store or the gym, and back home. Daniel started feeling foolish. Maybe Laura was right. Maybe he really was seeing things where there was nothing. But on Friday, the pattern changed. At 6 p.m., when Laura should have been heading home or maybe running a quick errand, the GPS showed the car parked at a residential address on the other side of town. Daniel stared at his phone screen, heart pounding. She stayed there for nearly 2 hours. When she finally came home at 8:30, she said she'd stayed late at the office to wrap up loose ends. Daniel didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed absolute certainty. Part of him still clung to the possibility of an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a friend's house. Maybe it was a client who lived there. Maybe Laura was helping someone with something. But even as he ran through those justifications in his mind, he knew he was fooling himself. In the days that followed, the pattern repeated with unsettling regularity. On Tuesday, the car stopped at the same address at 6:20 p.m. and stayed for an hour and 40 minutes. Daniel was at the office when he saw the notification and had to lock himself in the bathroom for a few minutes just to catch his breath. On Thursday, it was 2 hours and 15 minutes. Always after regular work hours. Always at the same place. Always with the same excuses when she came home late, tired, complaining about meetings that ran over. Daniel looked up the address online and discovered it was a luxury apartment building, modern, expensive, with 24-hour security and underground parking. His stomach churned when he saw photos of the place on the developer's website. It was exactly the kind of building he himself might have designed, clean lines, expensive finishes. He used Google Street View to study the facade, memorizing every detail. He thought about going there, waiting on the street until he saw what was really happening. But he knew he couldn't just show up. If he caught something and reacted impulsively, he could be accused of harassment or worse. He needed concrete, documented proof, something that left no room for denial or made-up stories, something that would protect his rights in the inevitable divorce that was looming. That's when he decided to hire a private investigator. He spent an entire afternoon researching, reading reviews, checking credentials. It wasn't hard to find a discreet, well-reviewed professional. The agency was in a modest downtown office, with no flashy signage. Daniel scheduled a consultation and went during his lunch break, telling coworkers he had a client meeting. The investigator, a middle-aged man named Greg, had the kind of face that showed he'd seen too much of human nature. He listened to Daniel's story without judgment, jotting notes in a worn notebook. Daniel explained the situation, showed him the GPS history on his phone, the dates, times, and alarming frequency. He provided photos of Laura from her Instagram, described her car and license plate, even showed Greg a photo of Bradley he'd found on the agency's website. Greg was straightforward, no sugarcoating or false hope. 48 hours. If something's going on, I'll find it. I'll follow her, take photos, document everything. If it's what you think it is, you'll have enough proof for any divorce proceeding. Daniel paid the deposit feeling wretched, as if hiring someone to follow his wife was itself a betrayal. But then he remembered the lies, the excuses, Bradley's hand in that photo, and the guilt turned into something harder and colder. Part of him still hoped he was wrong, that there'd be a perfectly innocent explanation for all this. But a bigger, more realistic part was already bracing for the worst. The next 2 days were torture. Daniel went to work, pretended everything was normal, and drew blueprints and reviewed projects on autopilot. At night, he had dinner with Laura, who seemed lighter, happier, probably relieved he'd stopped asking questions. She even initiated sex one night, and Daniel responded mechanically, feeling hollow inside. When she fell asleep afterward, he lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if she thought about Bradley while being with him, if she compared them, if she was pretending. Greg called on the morning of the third day. His voice was professional, but there was a note of sorrow Daniel immediately recognized. It was the tone of someone about to confirm your worst fears. You'll want to see the photos in person. This isn't the kind of thing you email. They met at a discreet cafe, far from Daniel's office and any place Laura might frequent. Greg arrived with a leather portfolio under his arm. He ordered coffee, waited for it to arrive, then slid a brown envelope across the table. "I'm sorry, man. I really am." Daniel opened the envelope with trembling hands, struggling to keep his composure in public. The first photo showed Laura getting out of her car in front of the apartment building, exactly at 6:15 p.m. the previous evening. She wore the same dress she'd had on that morning, a crossbody bag, walking briskly toward the entrance. The second showed Bradley arriving minutes later, in a suit but no tie, carrying a work folder as if it were just another professional commitment. The third showed them both entering the lobby together, Bradley's hand on her back, a gesture so practiced it looked natural. The rest were devastating and increasingly worse. Greg had gained access to a neighboring building with a partial view into Bradley's fourth-floor apartment. Through a partially open window, silhouettes could be seen moving. One photo clearly showed them standing far too close for professional boundaries. Another showed them sitting side by side on the couch in a pose that couldn't possibly be interpreted as work-related. There was a 3-photo sequence showing them moving around the living room, drinks in hand, laughing, completely at ease, like a real couple. And then the final photo, captured as they neared the window, revealed unmistakable, personal, inappropriate contact between them. There was no room for interpretation, it was clear they'd crossed every line. It was undeniable intimacy. It was betrayal crystallized in pixels. Daniel felt as if the floor had vanished beneath him, as if he were falling into a bottomless pit. His hands gripped the photos so tightly they crumpled at the edges, leaving fingerprint smudges on the glossy paper. The coffee he'd ordered sat cooling on the table, untouched. He didn't trust himself to pick up the cup without dropping it. Greg stayed silent, giving Daniel the time he needed to process. After several minutes, Daniel managed to speak, his voice hoarse and distant. How long? He needed to know. He needed to grasp the scale of the lie. Greg checked his notes, flipping pages in a notebook filled with times and observations. Based on the movement patterns you gave me, and what I've seen over the past few days, I'd say this has been going on for at least 3 months. Maybe longer. The building's doorman, not realizing the significance, mentioned she's a regular visitor, always the same days, always the same time. Daniel swallowed hard. 3 months. A quarter of a year of lies. A quarter of a year of goodnight kisses that were lies. I love you, that were lies. Future plans built on a foundation of betrayal. He paid the rest of Greg's fee in cash, mechanically thanked him for a service no one should ever need to hire, and left the cafe with the envelope under his arm, feeling the weight of the photos like lead. For 2 days, Daniel planned meticulously. There would be no explosive confrontation at home, no shouting, no broken dishes, no neighbors listening through thin walls. No. Laura deserved something more than that. She deserved to face the consequences of her actions in a way she couldn't deny, couldn't downplay, couldn't twist into, he went crazy and violent. And he knew exactly how to do it. The universe, in its cruel irony, had handed him the perfect opportunity. Laura had mentioned the previous week, before everything fell apart, that she was hosting dinner. Bradley and his wife, Patricia, would be coming to their place on a Friday night. It was an effort to better integrate the team with families, according to Laura, who'd pitched the idea enthusiastically, saying it was important for her career to build connections beyond the workplace. At the time, Daniel had found it odd, had questioned whether it was really necessary, but he'd agreed because he always supported Laura's professional plans. Now, he saw the grotesque, painful irony of the situation. His wife was bringing her lover, and his deceived wife, into their home, preparing to serve wine and make polite conversation while hiding the secret that would destroy them all. He decided to let the dinner happen. On the scheduled night, Daniel helped Laura prepare everything. He was kind, helpful, even playful. Laura seemed relieved by his good mood, happy he wasn't asking uncomfortable questions. When Bradley and Patricia arrived, Daniel greeted them with a warm smile. Patricia was an elegant woman, a few years older than her husband, with the confident posture of someone used to social settings. Bradley shook Daniel's hand with a grip that was too firm, the kind of gesture men use to mark territory. Daniel noticed how Bradley's eyes briefly met Laura's, a quick glance that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Dinner started smoothly. Conversation turned to work, travel plans, funny anecdotes. Laura was radiant, laughing at Bradley's jokes, pouring wine with the ease of the perfect hostess. Daniel watched everything with a calmness he didn't know he possessed. Earlier that evening, he'd connected his laptop to the living room TV, hidden behind the sideboard, with the remote in his pocket. He waited until dessert was served, until everyone was comfortable and relaxed. Then he stood up. "Before we have dessert, I'd like to share something with you." Laura looked at him curiously. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He smiled. "Just a moment. I promise it's worth it." He picked up the remote and pressed a button. The living room TV came to life. The first photo appeared on the large screen. Laura getting out of her car. The room fell silent. The second photo. Bradley arriving. Patricia frowned. "What is this?" The third photo. The two of them entering the building together. Laura went pale. "Daniel, wait," he didn't stop. The fourth photo showed them in the apartment, far too close for any professional justification. Patricia stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. Bradley tried to speak. "This isn't what it looks like." The fifth photo captured an intimate gesture. Patricia let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a shocked sob. The sixth made it clear there had been a personal involvement going on for a long time. Daniel paused the slideshow. The silence in the room was deafening. He looked at Laura, frozen in her chair, eyes wide with horror. Then at Bradley, whose face had lost all color. Finally at Patricia, who stared at her husband with a look of fury and betrayal that mirrored exactly what Daniel felt. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "Laura, remember when you called me paranoid? When you said I was seeing things in that team photo?" He pointed to the screen. "Well, I guess my vision was working perfectly." Laura tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Patricia, then at Bradley, then back at Daniel. I can explain," Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Explain? Explain how you spent the last 3 months looking me in the eyes every day, telling me you loved me, while having an affair with your boss in his apartment?" Bradley stood up. "Look, Daniel, this got out of hand, but it just happened," Daniel cut him off. "Sit down. You don't get to say anything here. In fact, you're lucky I didn't call your HR department before showing these photos to your wife." Patricia was shaking. She turned to Bradley, eyes blazing with tears and fury. "How long?" Bradley didn't answer. She repeated, louder. "How long, Bradley?" He mumbled something inaudible. Patricia grabbed her purse. "I hope it was worth it. My lawyer is going to have a field day using these photos in the divorce. And you can count on it, the prenup you signed when we got married will make sure you don't see a cent of my money." She looked at Laura with contempt. "I hope you enjoyed that promotion he promised you, sweetheart." Because it's going to be the last thing you get out of this. Laura finally found her voice. Daniel, please, we can talk about this. Daniel shook his head. There's nothing to talk about, Laura. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. You have a week to move out of this apartment. Laura stood up, desperate. You can't do this. This is my home too. Daniel remained calm. Actually, the apartment is in my name. Remember? It was a gift from my parents when we got married. And before you try to argue otherwise, I have these photos, I have the GPS logs from your car, and I have the testimony from the private investigator I hired. Your lawyer will advise you to accept the terms I'm offering. Bradley tried one last move. Daniel, man, let's be rational here. Daniel turned to him with cutting coldness. Rational? You slept with my wife, in your apartment, repeatedly, while I was at home believing she was working late. You held her shoulders in team photos while probably planning your next betrayal. And you want to talk about being rational? He took a step toward Bradley, who instinctively stepped back. You've got enough losses to deal with, and they're all consequences of your own choices. And you can be sure the natural consequences of your professional choices will follow you wherever you go. Patricia was already at the door. She looked at Bradley one last time. You'll come pick up your stuff on Monday. Until then, I want you out of the house. She left, slamming the door behind her. Bradley hesitated, glancing between Daniel and Laura, but eventually left too, shoulders slumped in defeat. Laura was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded. Daniel, please, it was a mistake. I was confused. I never wanted to hurt you. Daniel grabbed his coat. You weren't confused, Laura. You made conscious choices. Every time you kissed that man, every time you lied about where you were, every time you came home and pretended everything was fine, those were choices. He walked to the door but paused before stepping out. And just so you know, some colleagues mentioned your behavior's been raising red flags lately. None of this earned you respect, just distance. He left, leaving Laura alone in the dining room, surrounded by the carefully prepared dinner and the wreckage of the life she'd thrown away. The months that followed were a storm of legal paperwork and emotional adjustments. Daniel threw himself into work, taking on bigger projects that demanded his full attention. Friends and family supported him, outraged by what Laura had done. The divorce moved quickly. Laura tried to challenge certain points, but her lawyer advised against it in light of the overwhelming evidence. She ended up leaving with far less than she'd hoped, just her clothes, some personal furniture, and her car. The apartment, joint savings, and most of their shared assets stayed with Daniel. As for Bradley, consequences came fast. True to her word, Patricia filed for divorce immediately. The prenup she'd insisted on years earlier, back when they married, ensured she kept her family fortune intact. Bradley lost access to the luxurious lifestyle he'd enjoyed. But that wasn't all. The story leaked at their agency. Human Resources launched an investigation into inappropriate supervisor-subordinate relations. Bradley was fired 2 weeks later for violating professional conduct policies. Laura received a formal warning and was transferred to another department, far from any prominent role. The promotion she'd been counting on never materialized. Colleagues who'd once been friendly now avoided her, no one wanted to be associated with the scandal. Daniel, on the other hand, began rebuilding. He accepted an invitation to work on an international project requiring frequent travel. It was exactly the kind of distraction he needed. Slowly, the sharp pain turned into a scar. He didn't forget, but he learned to live with the betrayal without letting it consume every moment. He started going out with friends again, picked up hobbies he'd set aside, and gradually opened himself to the possibility of trusting someone new, though with far more caution. 9 months after that fateful dinner, Daniel was at a cafe when he spotted Laura. She was alone, looking more tired than he'd ever seen her. Their eyes met briefly through the window. Laura seemed to consider coming in, but then looked away and kept walking down the sidewalk. Daniel watched her go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It wasn't satisfaction at her suffering, nor regret for what he'd done. It was simply the realization that they were two people who'd once loved each other and were now complete strangers. He finished his coffee and left, walking in the opposite direction without looking back. Life had exacted the price of betrayal. Laura lost her marriage, her professional reputation, and the trust of everyone around her. Bradley lost his family, his job, and the social standing he'd spent years building. Daniel lost the innocence of believing love alone was enough to keep a marriage intact. But unlike the other two, he found something in the process, the strength to start over, the dignity of not settling for less than he deserved, and the wisdom to recognize that some things, once broken, can never be the same. And maybe, he thought as he walked under the afternoon sun, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, starting over was the only real way to move forward. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.